This week, our gospel lesson begins on that first Easter night. The disciples were frightened, locked away, mostly together, probably trying to wrap their heads around an empty tomb, around everything that Mary told them about the conversation she had had with Jesus, the one they had watched die just a few days before. You can read the story in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. Basically, as they are holed up and scared and behind locked doors, Jesus appears and he says, "Peace be with you." Thomas wasn't there for some reason. We can only speculate why, but they told him about what happened and he just couldn't seem to believe it. Maybe he wanted to, but it was just too much. Maybe he didn't dare to hope that it could be true. Maybe he thought they had just lost their minds, but he said that he would never believe this until he saw it for himself. And more than just seeing, he would need to feel Jesus' wounds with his own hands in order to believe. So then a week later, they were once again behind closed doors, and Jesus showed up again. And he said, "Peace be with you." And he offered for Thomas to see and to touch so that he wouldn't doubt but believe. And then Thomas comes out with a pretty amazing response. He says, "My Lord and my God." That's significant because it's the first time anyone had made that connection before, had made that exact statement of faith. So before we ever even get to the doubting part of this story, we have to acknowledge the fear and the anxiety and the uncertainty and disillusionment that were in the atmosphere. All these things that led to or grew even stronger as people sat behind closed doors, doors that were even locked. And it's all too familiar as many of us and as people around the world sit behind closed doors, wondering, dealing with anxiety and uncertainty, coping with a new reality. And there are doors that are also pretty much locked to people right now. Perhaps the doors to a place where a loved one lives, or the doors to a hospital where a loved one may be dying. The doors to celebrations are also locked right now, whether it be a birthday or a commencement or even a funeral gathering. And like the disciples that first Easter, we are fearful for our own lives, for the lives of people we love. We're fearful for what the future holds. And is it any wonder that doubt would exist for Thomas or for us? I have so many doubts right now, and I'm thinking that you might too. So I'm not even going to share my specific doubts with you, just in case I've thought of something that you hadn't. But in general, I have doubts that people are telling the truth at any given moment. I have doubts that things could possibly be as bad as I imagine them to be. I have doubts when I hear prospective good news, because I don't know if I can deal with hope that might be shattered. And if this doesn't sound like Thomas in his situation, I don't know what would. Doubting Thomas, as we've come to know him, actually had a week's worth of doubt in this story. And he instantly makes an amazing confession of faith and then goes on to spend the rest of his life telling people about Jesus. I imagine telling people about how Jesus touched his life. Church tradition says that he died around the year 72. And during those years, he traveled to present-day Iraq and Iran, all the way to the west coast of India, sharing the good news that he had seen and touched himself, establishing churches. And by churches, we don't mean buildings. We mean people who would find community in whatever way they could because of God's love for them and for the whole world. 1 week in this story, 1 short week, he doubted. Is it any wonder why we'd be hard on ourselves or other people for our own significant doubts at this time? So what made the difference for Thomas? And what might make the difference for us? Well, it's pretty simple to me as I read it and experience it. Jesus showed up. For Thomas, he showed up not just once, but twice, because that's what it took. It didn't matter if their doors were shut or even locked. He showed up, offering peace. And it wasn't just Jesus, it was the risen Christ. And that's important for us today, because Jesus may not walk into your house this evening, but the risen Christ will show up. He appeared a few times to the disciples after the resurrection, and they believed and they carried on in his name. For us, we have thousands of years of stories and experiences of how Christ continues to show up time and time again. Closed doors, locked doors, global pandemics. Christ is there. Christ is right here with you. Christ is there in the places we wish we could be, in the hospital rooms and in the care facilities, in all the places where loved ones are separated, where people are suffering in any way. Into every room, every home, every situation, and every heart, the risen Christ shows up and offers peace. Right now, I'm praying that we will recognize him when it happens, because it will happen. It's already happening. There are no doubts or fears powerful enough to stop it from happening. The wonderful hymn writer Carolyn Winfrey Gillette created a hymn about Thomas several years ago, and it ends with these words: "O Lord, may we, like Thomas, keep growing day by day. Increase our faith and guide us, for Lord, you are the way." Peace be with you.